Hey, Growth Hacker Conference! Today I'll tell you about the superpower of experimentation and how to use it correctly. You can find the superpower of experimentation at the very beginning of experimentation at ideation. And I'll tell you why democratizing this process helps businesses grow and adapt, what this has to do with insects, and also what the best way to ideate ideas is and how to use your own brain in the best way possible. A quick note, a lot of my slides have references, URLs, and if you want to follow those links to articles or review this presentation again, please connect with me on LinkedIn and I will just share it with you. A little bit about me. I built my first web shop when I was 11 years old, and at that time there were no easy tools like WooCommerce or Shopify, so I coded everything myself. I now work at experimentation agency Spiro, previously called CXL Agency, and I help clients like SEMrush, maybe you know it, it's the SEO marketing tool, and an Australian beauty web shop with 1.5 million visitors called Adore Beauty. Before that, I optimized a news website with 8 million visitors in the Netherlands, and before that I worked at a telco that was a competitor of Vodafone, all doing CRO. And for me, the superpower of experimentation is ideation, and let me tell you why. I wasn't always a successful experimenter or CRO specialist for big companies and running big experimentation programs. No, not at all. I started out as a young creative content creator. And in my first job, my boss checked every letter I wrote. If I were to publish something without him seeing it, he would yell at me. He even had people that checked what I was doing for him. And what I was free to think of was what I chose on my sandwich for lunch that day. In my second job, things were already different. In my team, people asked, "What do you think?" And I was amazed that anyone would actually care. Higher up in the company, it still looked like this. And they, of course, didn't ask what to think or what to do next. They would just tell you what to do. I'm from the Netherlands and my country is a democracy, saying that you can vote for your representative. But where I actually lived and where my life played out in companies, in offices, there was no such a thing as a democracy, and companies and ideas came from the top down. Reasons why companies start with experimentation are usually also top down. Not always though, but it's usually, to make more money, to make more profit for the business, or to avoid risk, which is totally logical. Sometimes zero is also seen as this holy grail to double conversions, which is far from a realistic view of what experimentation, of course, actually is. Why businesses start with experimentation often determines for a while if what they are doing is either zero, CXO, or experimentation. At Spiro, we have these three definitions. Zero is conversion rate optimization to find winners, improve conversions, and basically make more profit. There is also something called CXO. This is doing tests to find out which UX on your page is the best for your customers. Sometimes experimentation programs are a mix, so sometimes they can be also CXO 0 or they can be only 0. But if your program is growing into CXO or experimentation, something in your company might start to change. Let's take a look at Netflix. In a blog, they write about their experimentation program. They say, very few of our ideas are winners, but experimentation democratizes ideation. Because we test all ideas and because most do not win, there is an openness to product ideas coming from all corners of the business. Anyone can raise their hand and make a suggestion. In my opinion, what happened is that because of experimentation, we learned that anyone can have a valuable idea or insight. Let's take a look at Booking.com. They always run like 1,000 experiments at the same time, and they say our methods and infrastructure were designed from their inception to reflect Booking.com's culture, that is, with democratization and decentralization of experimentation and decision making in mind. What's interesting is that they say that democratization came from their culture. Booking.com is also a Dutch company, but in my experience, that didn't mean that companies reflected a democracy at all, like I told you before. On top of that, we're not all Netflix or Booking.com. Companies like that have a high experimentation maturity. Experimentation is ingrained in the organization, and lots of different people can run a B test by themselves. What maturity models usually lead up to is that everyone can run an A B test with a tool. To democratize is to make something accessible to everyone. Companies like that are in the very right top of this graph. They have a center of excellence that might check the quality of all the tests being done, and multiple people or business units can set up A/B tests. Most companies don't have experimentation in every business unit. Usually, experimentation actually starts with a jack of all trades, someone that does CRO on the side. And then after that phase, someone is hired to do CRO, which creates this kind of CRO one-man show. Someone is there but has to do everything themselves. And after that, this person might create a support system around him or her, and later this leads up to multiple people being able to test. If you're wondering how mature your organization is in experimentation, then Spiro has developed a quiz for that. You can fill it in and find out your maturity level in multiple areas like culture, tooling, people, skills, and process. When I started experimentation, I was a jack of all trades, doing other work on the side. But what I noticed is that because of experimentation, suddenly everyone listened to the 24-year-old me. I had data on my ideas, I had assumptions about the behavior of visitors backed up by A/B tests. And my ideas became as valuable as those of a higher up. And now, years later, I know that experimentation proves that the idea of someone in the call center has as much right to exist as the idea of a CEO. Often in my experimentation program backlogs, both ideas are just living next to each other, and I'll tell more about that later. What I see happening sometimes is that this realization causes a bit of a counter movement. In this slide, you see a CRO specialist being greedy. Sometimes what I notice is that higher management, stakeholders, and hippos are seen as the bad guys when it comes to ideation and thinking up experiments. And CRO specialists want to do it all by themselves, and they get kind of greedy about their ideas. But in the end, it's all about sharing and equality, ideas existing next to each other, not ruling out particular ideas for particular people. What having diverse ideas does is that it makes a company adaptable, because the CEO, management, or a few stakeholders are not the only ones driving innovation, change, and coming up with ideas. No, the whole company is involved. Well, this is the most itchiest slide I've ever made, but it kind of illustrates what I am trying to say. The whole company is involved and is using their feelers to know what's going on. A CEO might not pick up on a new UX pattern from TikTok or something bigger, like something going on in society or with your buyers, while someone in the product team might. Personally, in my experimentation programs, I make sure that experimentation gives a voice to as many people as possible. I believe that we live in a time for this, that we want to hear more diverse voices and ideas, and that this is eventually only good for business. But how do you do that? How do you democratize ideation? I was lead experimentation for a Dutch news website with 8 million visitors a month. And there was one CRO specialist, me. There was no development, sometimes there were a few designs, but there were a lot of questions. I coded tests myself and eventually made my way into the planning meetings of developers. Every other sprint, they would eventually develop a test for me. The rest I still coded myself. It got traction. People started to notice. I presented the results. And of course, this approach is very, very bottom up. To grow experimentation, you'll eventually need leadership buy-in and the culture and company to fit the direction you are going. I was lucky. And after 1 year, developers started to want to test the way of loading the app, loading it all at once or per parts. Designers wanted to verify multiple ways of solving a certain problem. Journalists wanted to know what the best format for their content was. The chief editor wanted to know how many articles with a picture should be on top of the website. The product team wanted to know if entertainment news would be better read in the afternoon, because that's what we saw in data, and if it would be better read if you would put it higher on the website. A lot of people started to pitch in, and not because I asked them to, they were very excited about their own ideas and what they had found in data or heard from readers. Ideation always brings this nice little spark of motivation that you can leverage. Another example, this time a recent client of mine. When I came into the program, there were not enough ideas, and the team seemed to really struggle in order to come up with 2 test ideas every week, which was part of their test velocity, and maxing out on that. But opening up the experimentation program to more voices and more ideas and more business units led to a big backlog of ideas that we can always get back to. It might be as simple as this screenshot. This is just a list of descriptions of ideas. The easier you make ideation, the more accessible it is. If you want to build a habit of doing push-ups every day, you also don't start with doing 100 push-ups. No, you start by doing 10 to make it doable. So making an easy to fill in form or easy format for an idea is just as important for you and for others. And what you also see here is in this screenshot is the second step of ideation, prioritization, which is adding ratio is kind of the next step of any ideation process. But before we get into that, let's talk a bit about how ideation works in the brain. Let's think about this. 2 plus 2. You know the answer, right? Now think about 56 plus 84. Try to calculate. Now this will take you some time. How does that feel compared to the 2 plus 2? In regards to ideation, I often think about the theory of Daniel Kahneman from his book Thinking Fast and Slow. He is saying that there is one part of the brain, that is the reptile brain, or system 1 as he calls it, that is fast, can instantly solve 2 plus 2 without much effort, and it can also remind you what you did when you were 4 years old. So this system is very creative and very good at making associations. Then there is the part of the brain that sets us apart from animals, our ratio. With that ratio, we are able to solve 56 plus 84 if we were to put some effort into it. This system can also judge if something you have written down is good or just won't make any sense to the person who will read it. So to create ideas and associate, you mostly use your system 1, that reptile brain. Part of facilitating the ideation process for yourself and for others is understanding how that works. Here are some ideation tips for helping people or yourself creating ideas in phase 1 with system 1 of the brain. First of all is to create the right circumstances. If people have ideas, let them. Don't judge or add rationalization just yet. You can collect all the ideas and write them down in your backlog. Listen to what is being said. Usually people talk about ideas but not necessarily follow up on them. And you could be the one to write them down. You can also create a digital place where people can leave ideas. It can be a form, or you can help them do it, listening to them and writing it down, or have them do it themselves. Make yourself available to talk, have one-on-ones with other people from other departments that seem out of reach, and these are all ways to collect ideas. Also, it's good to help others ideate based on data. We know that high-value hypotheses are usually driven by data. So before ideation, collect data from surveys or Google Analytics or whatever to feed this to others as much as possible as inspiration for ideas. And let me tell you one thing. Big brainstorming sessions just don't work. We feel like they work because in the end we find each other agreeing on something, and that feels good. I came across this tweet that summed up research about this, and if you like to geek out on it, you can do it later. For short, ideation is best done alone, and later you join forces together. Also, and yes, I recently found this guy on Twitter and he summarizes all this amazing research. I found he also found this, that quality of ideas leads to quantity. People who came up with the most ideas also tend to have better ideas. Then, when there is an idea, in the second phase you add ratio. This is what makes the test live or die. Step 2 of ideation is adding ratio. You can use a few frameworks that I'll explain shortly here. Writing a hypothesis can help, prioritization can help, and also understanding which idea come from data, and thinking about the sample size of your test and if this idea even needs to be a test. Also, educating others on these things is important. I'll explain a little bit more about these items one by one. One application for all of this is that sooner or later someone comes up with an outrageous idea. Don't get frustrated, but try to help others in the process. First up, do you even need to test? Sometimes it's not really necessary to test. You can use other research methods too. There is a checklist from Tal Raviv that can help out with this question. Should you run an A/B test or not? Sometimes people can get caught up in their idea and how great it is without realizing that it cannot be measured or will never be implemented. And this checklist might help you out. Next up is creating a great hypothesis. You can use this kit. If you can't create a good hypothesis, usually your idea is not worth a test. Now use a prioritization framework to make sure you will start with the right ideas that will make the highest impact. This is what adds ratio, system 2, to speak of Kahneman's terms, to the ideas after this safe, creative, associative ideation process. And now you can start picking the hypothesis that you will actually translate into a test. You could use the PXL model as shown here. It's kind of like pie or ice model on steroids. What PXL does is give more points through hypotheses and test ideas that are based on research, and that can be data from Google Analytics, but it can also be data from watching session recordings. PXL prioritization also takes into account how much time it costs to realize a test. And in an ideal world, you would have a mixed program of small, medium, and big innovative tests. But if you can actually run small tests, it's usually up to the strength of your data and the samples that you can make. The more visitors you have, the smaller changes you can measure. And with this, we have come to the last slide already. What you learned is that diverse ideas lead to adaptable businesses. The first step of ideation is creativity, and you can let this be inspired by data, and later ideas become tests because of rationalization. Ideation is a very important part of the process, the very start, and in my opinion, it's often overlooked. For me, it's the hidden power of experimentation. Now you know how to do it, why many feelers lead to adaptive businesses, and I wish you all the luck for implementing it into your experimentation program. If you want to have the slides, follow me on LinkedIn. If you have a question or you want to let me know what you think, just send me a message. Have fun collecting everyone's idea and good luck with your experimentation program.